This is the new 2023 Mercedes-AMG G63 4x4 squared, and it is ridiculous. The regular Mercedes G-Wagon is already kind of ridiculous, a giant luxury box that's amazing off-road, but this takes things to a whole new level of insane. It has 580 horsepower, a $350,000 starting sticker price, and it comes with an off-road lift kit from the factory. And today I'm going to review the new 4x4 squared and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Dodge Viper RT10, which sold for over $41,000, this fantastic Tesla Model X Plaid, which sold for $117,000, and this lovely Toyota Century with a V12 that sold for over $22,000. We love the weird stuff on Cars and Bids. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. With daily auctions and free listings, check it out at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new AMG G63 4x4 squared. And I'm going to start with a question you might have, which is, what exactly is this thing? What the hell is Mercedes doing building this vehicle? The answer is, like I said earlier, this is a G-Wagon monster truck. It is literally a Mercedes-AMG G63, the high-performance version of the G-Wagon, lifted up with higher ground clearance and more off-road capabilities. It's essentially like a factory off-road modified Mercedes G-Wagon. And amazingly, this isn't the first time Mercedes has done this. The previous generation G-Wagon also had a 4x4 squared model, which was also a lifted off-road focused monster truck G-Wagon from the factory, and now they've done it again for the new G-Wagon. But, and this is something you notice as soon as you lay eyes on the new G-Wagon 4x4 squared, this model isn't quite as insane as the old one. This G-Wagon has 13.8 inches of ground clearance, which is a massive number by any measure, and it's way more than the standard G-Wagon, which has 9.5 inches of ground clearance. That's already a huge number. The regular G-Wagon has great off-roading capabilities with its 9.5 inches. This is 13.8, but the original 4x4 squared was 17.2 inches of ground clearance. It was simply lifted even more. And as a result, this isn't quite as capable as the outgoing model either. For instance, water fording depth. In the standard G-Wagon, 27.6 inches of water fording, which is fantastic. This can do 35.8 inches of water fording, which is really fantastic. But the old 4x4 squared could do almost 38 inches of water fording before it would start to have an issue. So it was more capable off-road. The new one is just not as off-road insane as the outgoing squared. Except in one important area, under the hood. You see, the old G-Wagon 4x4 squared was never offered as an AMG model. It was only the G500 or G550, depending on what market you were in. There was never a high-performance version, which always kind of perplexed G-Wagon and AMG enthusiasts. It seemed like the perfect car to AMG-ify, but they never did. And so the outgoing G 4x4 squared only had about 420 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque. Big numbers, but it was a big vehicle and it wasn't much of a performer. The new one is AMG only, so this is only offered as a G63 with a twin-turbo V8 and about 580 horsepower and 620 pound-feet of torque. Real massive numbers. So even though this doesn't have the water fording depth and the off-road capabilities of the old one, it's a lot faster. And in addition to the big power, the new 4x4 Squared still has all of the goodies of the old one, including portal axles. Check this out. In your car, the axle goes across the wheels and joins them in the center of the wheel, because of course it does, but not in this car. This has portal axles, which basically means there's a gear positioned above the center of the wheel on the inside that allows Mercedes-Benz to mount the axles higher up to give this more off-road capability, more ground clearance, so the axle's not getting in the way when you're running over stuff. Only the most very serious off-road vehicles have portal axles, like the original Hummer and Humvee military vehicles, and the G63 4x4 Squared does also. And of course there's more than that. Massive tires, as you can see. 22-inch wheels wrapped in these huge all-terrain tires, beefy, capable, and they stick way out from the body. Wide, massive, gargantuan tires that stick so far out they need wide, massive fender flares to contain them. And you can see huge flares front and rear, which has been a hallmark of the 4x4 Squared, and a tradition that continues on this one. Again, the flares are not as big as they were on the outgoing 4x4 Squared, but still a tremendously distinctive component of this car, and you can clearly tell it's different from a standard G-Wagon when you see it from just about any angle looking at those flares. And just like the old 4x4 Squared, the flares are partially carbon fiber, which I've always felt was insane because it's an off-road vehicle and that's like the most sticky outy part. You're on some rugged trail going past rocks, boulders, trees. You're gonna get those fender flares caught on something and damage a tremendously expensive carbon fiber piece. It doesn't make any sense. This is kind of true of this whole vehicle. By the way, in addition to the giant wheels and tires and fenders, this also has mud flaps. You can see positioned behind the front wheels and then back here behind the rear wheels, Mercedes-Benz branded mud flaps. It's not that big a deal. A lot of cars have mud flaps, but I just love it so perfectly fits this vehicle, adding mud flaps to the giant off-road G-Wagon. And beyond the power and the off-road equipment underneath, the 4x4 Squared also has some other incredibly cool upgrades over a standard G-Wagon, including this roof rack. Massive roof rack, as you can see, and you get up there and see it's got like a metal flat top to it. I assume this can handle the weight of a person or people, so you could mount a roof tent up here from the factory and then camp on top of your 4x4 Squared when you're out in the wilderness. In the back, there is even a ladder to climb up to get to the roof rack. It's a little ladder, but it's capable of taking, it says, around 220 pounds, so a person can climb it up and then they're on the roof of their G-Wagon enjoying their giant roof rack. And there's still a lot more cool stuff to talk about. For example, the rear bumper. This vehicle is lifted so high that the factory rear bumper on a regular G-Wagon no longer conforms to bumper regulations and standards. It's simply too high to be an actual bumper. So Mercedes has to stick a second lower auxiliary bumper on this vehicle, as you can see, this giant metal bumper at the bottom, to actually have a bumper as defined by regulations for positioning. And that's just cool. My car is lifted so much, I had to add a second bumper from the factory. I just love that. Now you can see over on the side of the bumper, you have this little textured surface on top. That's because the bumper acts as the first step for the ladder, and then the rest of the ladder is also textured surfaces, so your foot won't slip off as you're climbing up to the top of your G-Wagon. Now also mounted back here, as you can see, is a large spare tire. Regular G-Wagons have that too, but the 4x4 Squared has this especially cool, kind of partially open spare tire carrier that says 4x4 Squared imprinted into carbon fiber on the very back, and it looks a lot cooler than the more luxurious one you get on a standard G-Wagon. Very cool spare tire carrier back here. Now, interestingly, this is a departure from the outgoing 4x4 Squared, which did not have a spare tire mounted on the back like almost every other G-Wagon does. They didn't bother doing it for the old Squared, presumably because the tire and wheel were so big that it would just block your rear visibility. And frankly, that's the case here too. You have a massive 22-inch wheel, a huge all-terrain tire. It's placed there, and as you can see, you really can't see out of the back of this vehicle, but thankfully now there's a solution for that. This new G 4x4 Squared has a camera for the rear view mirror. A lot of cars are adding these rear view mirror cameras, but Mercedes-Benz hasn't added it to any of their vehicles yet. I guess it's making its debut in the 4x4 Squared, and with good reason. It allows you to actually see out the back. If you're curious where they mounted this camera, I was too. I couldn't find a spot on the outside of this car where they mounted it. I looked all over and finally discovered it's actually on the inside of the rear window. It's in this little housing here, which is a pretty cool placement for it because it means that dust, debris, water can't get on it, damage it, get in the way, cloud your vision. You'll always be able to see out the back window. You just wipe it with a wiper and your mirror works. And there's still more cool stuff to talk about, more changes over the standard G-Wagon back here. The roof rack is an option, but regardless of whether you get the roof rack, you will have this piece on the back with little red lights on it, a carbon fiber housing for lights. That's there for regulatory purposes. The federal government here in the United States says that if a vehicle is over a certain width, it needs to have these marker lights, 3 in the middle and 2 on the sides, red in back, and then the same thing in front, orange marker lights in front and red in back. And this 4x4 squared is so massively wide with its portal axles and its huge wheels and tires that it gets over that width limit, and so they have to include these as part of a federal government mandate if they want to sell this in the United States. Now, you will also notice up front on this light panel is 2 big LED lights pointing forward like an off-roader might have to see in the wilderness in the dark. This is included from the factory on the 4x4 squared, just like it was on the old model, but also like on the old model, you can't actually use it. Again, regulations here in North America prohibit you from turning those on while you're driving, moving, and so Mercedes-Benz disables those cool lights for North American 4x4 squared models, but presumably you can find someone to wire them up for you and have bright LED lighting. They just can't do it when they sell you the car new from the factory. And then we move on to pricing. And by the way, thank you to Mercedes-Benz of Temecula here in the San Diego area for letting me check out this 4x4 squared, because these are not easy to find. Even Mercedes-Benz USA doesn't really have that many of them, and they're not exactly advertising them. They've been surprisingly tight-lipped about this vehicle. They haven't really released official power or torque figures. Pricing isn't available. The configurator for this isn't even up online, and yet they're arriving in dealerships. I'm not sure why this is so stealth and subtle, but for some reason it is. And so I am going to tell you pricing, even though Mercedes-Benz hasn't yet. This starts around $350,000, a massive increase over, well, everything. The old 4x4 squared was around $240,000 sticker. Now, it wasn't an AMG model, but still, that's $100,000+ price increase. And the standard G63, not 4x4 squared, starts around $125,000, $135,000. So this is double the money. Then again, it's also a lot more capable. There's a lot of true complex off-road engineering and hardware that goes into this vehicle separate from the standard G63. Still big money. Now, this particular one is equipped to around $370,000, just below, thanks to a few options, including the roof rack, which costs $5,000 extra, but it's very cool both to use and to look at. And another expensive option is this color. They call it Cardinal Red Magno, and it costs $6,500 extra. But again, pretty cool to look at. But anyway, next we move inside the 4x4 squared, and I will say the interior is very similar to a standard G-Wagon, although you have a huge step up to get in here. As you can see, you really make use of the running boards because it's so high up that there's really no other way to easily climb in. And when you are climbing in, you'll notice this little badge here that says this vehicle was Schuckel tested. Apparently, Schuckel is the name of a mountain in Austria near where these are built, and it was tested there, and it was able to climb the mountain, and so it gets this medallion announcing to everyone that it could in fact climb a mountain that no one has ever heard of. But you get inside the 4x4 squared, and again, very similar to a standard G-Wagon, which is to say the old school Mercedes-Benz interior. It's actually kind of interesting. The G-Wagon has not been available for sale in the US market since the 2021 model year because of some issue with the V8 powertrains, either compliance or emissions or regulations. They didn't sell a 22 model G-Wagon, and it's now only coming back for 23, starting with this, the 4x4 squared. Now, I figured that would mean an upgrade to the interior, which was already due for the G-Wagon because it uses the old school center console, controller and knob, as you can see here, and the old school version of MBUX infotainment system. This isn't a touchscreen, even though all other Mercedes-Benz models have migrated to a touchscreen and a new center controller. But in fact, the G-Wagon has it. Even for the 23 model year, it's kind of the last Mercedes-Benz holdout using the old tech. And that also means that you don't get the full driver assistance features available in other Mercedes models in this car. So, for example, there's no auto steering like you can get in a C-Class or an E-Class. Well, here in this $370,000 G-Wagon, it's not available. Even though Mercedes did a recent redesign to the G-Wagon to make it fresh and modern, it's already starting to kind of feel a little outdated compared to other Mercedes models. But despite that, it is still very cool and very luxurious in here with some typical G63 things. For example, the little screen dials on the steering wheel. What I mean by that is there are dials on the steering wheel that are actually screens. The one over on the right side, you twist the dial and you change the drive mode, which is shown on this little screen in the middle, mounted on the steering wheel. Over on the other side of the steering wheel, same deal. You have one button that you can press that adjusts the transmission to go from automatic mode to manual shifting mode, and then another button you can press to turn on the sport exhaust. You press that, it shows on the screen that the sport exhaust is on, and then it sounds amazing. Take a listen. Now, one interesting drawback in the interior of the 4x4 squared is there's no specific special 4x4 squared stuff in here. You pay a lot more than a standard G-Wagon, and on the outside, it's very clear that you have a special vehicle, but inside, it just looks like a regular G-Wagon, except the grab handle over on the passenger side says G63 4x4 squared. It's different from the standard one. You can grab onto that while you're off-roading, and, well, the seating position, frankly, sitting up here, you're above everything. I'm looking down on the roofs of crossovers and SUVs, obviously sedans. You're way above stuff, so that alone definitely gives you the feel that you're in something a little different. And then we move on to the back seat in the 4x4 squared, which is sort of the same deal as the front seat. Very similar to other G-Wagon models. Nothing particularly special or interesting in here except for the massively high step-in that is required to get inside. Once you do step in, though, you will find, again, same as other G-Wagons, especially G63s, which means you get some like performance seat trim. You also got that in front, but otherwise same headroom, same legroom, all the same stuff in the back, which is to say relatively comfortable, although not huge. Now, there are some nice creature comforts worth pointing out in the back. For one thing, you do have a climate control zone back here. You can adjust the temperature, the fan speed. You got your own climate vents, so you can change all that for just the rear. And you have heated rear seats in back, which is another nice comfort feature. And you have a few power ports back here. You open up this little compartment and you can see some power ports where you can charge some stuff in the back of your G, adding to your convenience. Now, also interesting in the new 4x4 squared is the cargo area, which is especially unusual because, well, the load floor is so high. This is like a pickup truck tailgate load floor situation. This thing is lifted so much. So if you want to lift heavy items into your 4x4 squared, well, good luck. You better be relatively strong. Otherwise, nothing especially interesting or unusual here. As you just saw, it has a swing out door that you have to open to get into the cargo area like all G-Wagons do. One drawback on this one is because that giant tire and wheel mounted on the door, it's even heavier than a standard G-Wagon, which is already pretty heavy. And so opening the cargo area, it's not just as simple as in most cars where you push a button and ding, ding, it opens right up. This thing, you got to do a little work. But that and the high load floor and some of the other weird things about this vehicle, they're just the drawbacks of owning an incredibly cool and special truck. And it's especially special because this seems to be kind of the end of the road. Mercedes-Benz is switching a lot of its lineup to electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, smaller powertrains. They've specifically announced the development of a fully electric or plug-in G-Wagon, and so this might just be the last lifted V8 old school G-Wagon. It's a very, very special vehicle, and it really may be the end of the road for this type of craziness. All right, driving the new 4x4 squared. This is going to be interesting. Now, I mentioned that this doesn't quite have the ground clearance, the capabilities, the insanity of the old 4x4 squared, but I will say, when you're sitting in it, that doesn't seem to matter all that much. No, it doesn't seem as absurd and as high up as the old one, but it's still absurd and high up. You're still way above everything else. You still feel like you're kind of in a monster truck, and now you have like 600 horsepower. Okay, so starting with the way that this feels, Yeah, you feel tall, you feel massively high up. It's a totally ridiculous thing, obviously, but it does have just a general G-Wagon feel to it, which is a great thing if you really like the G-Wagon. It's a comfortable car. You get this nice boxy look, which is great. You're sitting up, it's luxurious, it's nice, and that's all good. It sort of feels like a regular G-Wagon, which is great, but then you also have this like crazy monster truck capability. Now, I'm gonna step on it here. It's exceptionally fast, although I will say it doesn't feel quite as fast as a regular G63. I recently drove a regular G63. Even a regular G550 almost feels faster. That's not true. The acceleration times for this are going to be insane, but you're so high up, and the G-Wagon in general is so insulated from the road, and in this car, you are even higher and even more removed from the road, and it almost doesn't feel like you're accelerating all that fast. It can be very deceptive. Now, as you might expect, body roll is more pronounced than in a standard G-Wagon, and that's obvious not just when you're going hard around corners, but even when you just are going around a standard curve on a regular road at a little bit higher speed than maybe the curve recommends. I wouldn't say it's ponderous. It is certainly not dangerous. But it feels kind of like some of those old 90s big boat luxury sedans where you just get more float and more body roll, body lean in corners, but you kind of expect that in a vehicle like this. And honestly, the regular G-Wagon is not unlike that just by virtue of being pretty long travel suspension and a tall SUV. And so this feels not that much different from that. You do really have this feeling of superiority on the road in this car, which I think is a lot of the reason why people buy these. They're sitting up high and they just think it's damn cool. And they're right, it is damn cool. Really, it's kind of interesting. There's not significant compromise in this car. The original 4x4 squared was so much more ridiculous that it felt like you were driving a dump truck, how high you were sitting, or like a serious large commercial vehicle. This feels more rational and more reasonable. I think that Mercedes must have gotten the feedback, hey, this is cool, but it doesn't really work with a lot of lifestyles. It's too absurd. And so they kind of toned it down and made it still absurd, but not as insane, and then added more power to kind of counteract the fact that it's not as crazy as it once was. I will say the ride quality is excellent, better than a standard G63. The G63 has sportier, stiffer suspension than a regular G-Wagon, and so it has a stiffer ride. This kind of goes back to more traditional G-Wagon ride quality and ride feel. One other interesting thing, people definitely don't stare at you like in the old one. You drive around in the old one and it's so monster truck that people are just like, what is this thing? This feels almost a little bit more rational. It almost has kind of the look of a G-Wagon that somebody just lifted, rather than one that's like a true monster truck. And so I wouldn't say that it's necessarily better or worse, but it's a different perspective. It's not quite as look at me, ridiculous, absurd. Truth be told, I really like this vehicle. I think that it's great. I think that it drives well. I think it's fun. I think it's cool. I think more automakers should do more cool and fun things like this. I'm surprised they built this car, given that the regular G-Wagon is so supply constrained that it's difficult for them to make enough to satisfy demand. You wouldn't think they would need to add a special version, but the profits must be crazy in this car. This is basically double the price of a regular G63, and it does have a lot more serious off-road capabilities, and the portal axles are no joke, but it's double the price. They must just make a ton of money on this car. And I think these are going to be super limited production. You're rarely going to see them around, but the G-Wagon is already kind of the ultimate car, and if you want the ultimate G-Wagon sitting above everybody, looking down on the world, but still have massive power, this vehicle makes basically no compromises. It can off-road like a great off-roader. It can sports car like a great sports car. And it's a luxury car too. It almost feels like an S-Class in here. It has all the benefits. The only drawback is a massive price tag in order to get all that stuff in one vehicle. But for the type of people who buy this, nothing else will do. It will simply be viewed as the car. And it kind of feels like the car. And so that's the new 2023 Mercedes-AMG G63 4x4 squared. This vehicle is ridiculous in every possible way, and I am thrilled that it exists. A monster truck AMG G-Wagon from the factory. And now it's time to give the new 4x4 squared a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 67 out of 100, which places the G63 4x4 squared here against rivals. The squared does great in the weekend categories, tying or beating out even purpose-built, fun-having machines like the Ram TRX and Ford F-150 Raptor R, but it's not quite as good in the daily categories, mostly due to its price tag, which is huge, and its size, which is huger. That size limits practicality. Most people won't be able to get this into their garage, limiting the squared to be more of a novelty. A very enjoyable and hilarious novelty.